Specter V2 700 build series. We're going to go ahead and just dive right in here. In this episode, we're going to be working on slowly assembling some bearing blocks. We've got a couple here that we're going to start with, starting on page 11 of the manual. And there's a lot of screws that come pre-installed on both of these sort of main shaft bearing block assembly here, and then this other bearing block here. So I've gone ahead and pulled all those, got those all cleaned and ready to go. But let's take a quick look at the manual here. You can see, looking at the top here, that these two bearings have already been pre-installed. So where you see this little rectangle here that says pre-assembled, you know that you don't have to pull the bearings. However, in this bearing block here, the third bearing block, this bearing here, if you cut to the overhead here, is not at all glued in. So we're going to go ahead and grab some green Loctite here, some retaining compound, and go ahead and get this bearing situated. Obviously we're going to be really careful when we do this not to get any Loctite inside the bearing. So we'll go ahead and grab green Loctite here, and I'm always wary when I have green Loctite out that I control very closely where it goes. So I tend to just put a drop on something, and I use an awl, which is essentially just a metal pokey stick, to spread it. So I'm going to go ahead and just dip the tip of the awl here in some green Loctite, and then just put the smallest amount around the outside of this bearing. And I'm spreading it out with the awl as well. And this just gives me a really nice small amount that I can control where it goes. I don't have a ton of, Loctite going everywhere, such that if I ever need to get this bearing out, it won't be completely horrible. Alright, so with that, we'll just go ahead and drop this in here now. And then that's all there is. We're going to take some paper towel and just dab the top. We don't want to spread it around because I don't want to risk getting any green Loctite in, but if any came out around that edge, which you can see a little tiny bit did because it's a nice tight fit, we've just gone ahead and picked it up here. You can see a little tiny bits where it came around just by dabbing the top. And then drop our main shaft collar back in there. Alright, so that's it for page 11. If we go back to the manual here and look to our next page, you can see that we're going to go ahead and start getting things aligned into the frame. So one of the things about these XL Power manuals is you get a lot of these sort of exploded drawing style bits where there's a lot of screws going in all at once. So it pays dividends to obviously be very cautious, especially when they're different size screws. And they are denoted by different colors in the manual what size they are. Keep a set of digital calipers handy so you can measure the screws and make sure you get the right ones in the right spots. I've gone ahead and gotten them all cleaned, and I've gone ahead and pulled the servo bracket pieces here that we're going to start needing here in these next steps, and I've got the sides of our frames here. So let's go ahead and get organized for that step, and then we'll get going. So for now, go ahead, find all your pieces, your servo rails, and let's get ready. Okay, so I've got all of our pieces and parts laid out. I sort of mocked it up on the bench here and was playing with parts to figure out which are the the left and right servo mounts, etc. And we've got a good handle on how this goes together now. Again, these exploded diagrams, they just take careful study. They're not super hard, but you do have to pay extra close attention. If you look into the manual again for this step, towards the right-hand side here, they do explain what the color code is. So the red screws are 3x6 millimeters. The sort of lighter blue, the Tiffany blue they call it, are 3x8 millimeters, and the 3x10 are the dark blue. So now that we know all of that, we can start piecing how this goes together. So first thing we're going to do is take this bearing block, and it goes with the main shaft collar facing upright, and we're going to line this up along the bottom here in these four spots here. Now, eventually, you are going to want to use Loctite on all of these, but whenever I'm putting the frame of a helicopter together, I don't use any Loctite until I have the whole thing kind of loosely fit together. I want to make sure everything stays square. I don't, tighten anything down super crazy tight yet. It's mostly going to be finger tight for a little while until I get a good handle on how this is going to go. So, put these 3 bolts in here. So we've got our lower bearing block in. Those first 3, actually it looks like it's the first 3 holes of the bearing block that we'll put these screws in for now. And then we're going to go ahead and take the main shaft bearing block here and get this situated here. It's going to go directly above the other block with this sort of hole here facing the side frame like so. And then that is going to get installed with our 3x8s. And we're going to put 3 of them in for now. Where we're going to take our bottom servo rail. Now, one of the nice things XL Power does is they print logos on things that help you figure out which one is your left and right, because the logos are always going to be upright or in a way that makes sense for someone to read it. And this piece here is going to sit here. Now, this is one of those moments where you go, oh, okay, this is where the longer bolt goes, because it's going through this plate. So, again, all of these traced lines, it's a little hard to figure out at first, but if you start with sort of the big pieces underneath and then as you layer stuff over, it just starts to make sense. So, our 10mm long bolt is going to go in right here in the servo rail, and that's because this portion of the servo rail here is a little bit thicker that it's going through. So this is going to go through the thicker part of the servo rail, or servo mount, and then through the frame and into the bearing block. Again, this is this guy here. So we've got our 10mm guy there. Okay, so we bring in our aluminum frame spacer, and that is going to go in this hole right here, just above the servo rail. So it's going to kind of shove that bolt in and get the spacer screwed onto that. Whenever I hit one of these steps here, I take a quick look at the sub-assembly in front of me and I count the bolts. And I count the bolts in the manual and I AB them. So I'm going to check that right now and we'll make sure we got them. So after looking things over, this looks good. We've got our spacer, our main shaft bearing block, our lower bearing block here, and as far as bolts go, we've got the 8 shown in the manual are all here. Again, no Loctite at this point. I just want to get everything aligned, make sure everything's good to go, and then I'll take it further from there. So let's go ahead and look at the next page of our manual here. We're just going to go ahead and get this anti-rotation bracket mounted to the bracket mount. So this is the anti-rotation bracket here, and this is the mount. There is a little step which is probably very difficult to see here in here, so make sure, do stare at the manual, make sure you get this round the right way. So in all things here, I always follow the same pattern, which is I get all of my bolts sort of loosely in place, and then once they're both in and I know everything's aligned, I'll go ahead and send things home. So again, so far in the frame I haven't tightened anything, but in this case there's no reason not to go ahead and tighten that. Alright, so going back to the manual here, you can see that we're going to get one of our canopy mounts in play here. So we have to find our set screw, our M3x12, and get that in place, and this will attach our bracket and canopy mount. So let's go ahead and find those parts and then we'll get going. Okay, so now we're going to go ahead and mount the anti-rotation pin. Now, this next step calls for an M3x12 set screw, basically a piece of all thread. My kit was missing these two, I have no doubt that if I'd reached out to Helidirect, XL Power, any of the XL Power team guys, there would have been one in the mail. But I'm not that patient, so I just cut the head with a Dremel off a long enough M3 bolt and made my own. So I'm going to go ahead and get that installed now. So the anti-rotation pin, you can see, kind of slides into this channel right here. And then this piece of all thread is going to go into the top hole here. So I'm just going to go ahead and get some Loctite on it before I thread it in, and then thread that piece in, thread it in until it stops. It's only about there, and then you take your canopy pin here and we're going to thread it on to here. And there is a nice hole in here that you just take an awl or something with a slender tip, and you can use that to tighten this. So don't go too crazy, just snug it up so that that's nice and tight. Okay, and with that, we are good to go. Moving on to the next step. Okay, so we're going to do a couple of little sub-assemblies here before we move these things into the frame. The first thing we're going to do are the idler pulleys. So looking at the manual here, you can see the idler pulleys here, and what we first need to do is get some green Loctite around these bearings in the pulleys. So we'll do that first, and then we'll put this sub-assembly together and set it aside, and then we'll do our boom clamps into this plate, and then we'll add the idler pulleys into that assembly after that. So, all right, let's go ahead and get our pulleys into here. I'll show you one, and then we'll go from there forward. And I'm going to use my awl again to get the green Loctite in here, and I'm just going to put it inside and spread it around in here. And I'm not using much at all. It's just a tiny drop on the inside and spreading it around, and then I'm just going to take the bearing and press fit it down. And there we go, there's one side, and they're a pretty tight fit, so green Loctite's just kind of insurance. So again, small amount on here, it doesn't take much, and really just spread it around, and you get sort of a nice wet coating inside, but you know, barely wet. All right, and there's that one is together there. Now we've got all four pulleys in there, and none of the green came out at all, which is great. That means I used just the right amount. And then we're going to take this sort of dog bone piece here and just press fit these pins in here like so. And then we take our idler pulleys, there's no up or down to these, and slide them through. Great. And then this piece here is the top bracket, and it looks like this will just go a press fit on top. So what you end up with is this here, and again, this doesn't screw together yet. Once it's captured in the frame, it'll be solid. But for now, we're just going to gently set it aside and let it hang out over there, and then we're going to move to our boom clamps. I'm going to go ahead and pull all of these screws out of here and get them clean, and then we'll come back and work on getting them mounted to this carbon plate here. Okay, so we're going to work on the tail boom clamps, and just a quick tip here, sometimes when you have two parts, especially in a tail boom clamp situation, sometimes one of them is slightly different. It's got a hole for like a pin screw to pin the boom, or it's slightly different than the other. And yes, you can stare at them and twist them around and see what looks different or not. But one of the easy ways is to just take a quick look at the manual and say, are they called out as different part numbers? In this case, they're not. They just list the one part number. The other one doesn't have a special part number, so you know they're the same. So that's good. The one thing it does call out is that the unthreaded hole, so looking at these holes toward the bottom of, let's call them legs, one is threaded and one is not. This is the unthreaded one, faces to the right, or basically towards you if you're looking at it in the manual, like so. So we're going to go ahead and take the 4 chamfered screws that are here, and we're going to take this carbon plate, and we're going to go ahead and get those oriented like so, and then get those through. So we'll get some Loctite on these guys, and get them going. Again, I'm just leaving this loose until I get all the screws in so that we know it's good. And then once I know it's lined up, I'll go ahead and send these home. Alright, and I'm going to go ahead and get the other one mounted in the same fashion. Again, just make sure the unthreaded hole is facing towards you on this side of the frame. Okay, so with that, we've got our two boom clamps on. We're going to go ahead and get this idler pulley assembly on. Now, in the case of this guy, these pieces are just sort of press fit. Being captured in the frame will hold them on. So we'll have to keep kind of a close hand on this. And this is going to go with the threaded sides this way. And it's going to stick out the back a little bit. So I've got these two bolts pulled aside here. And go ahead and get those tightened. And I may lay this on its side here just to help keep the whole thing together. Because again, this is just a press fit assembly at this point. And then we'll go ahead and tighten these down. Okay, good to go. That's this sub-assembly go. Moving on to the next page. Okay, you can see here in the next page of the manual that we're going to take this assembly of our idler pulleys and our boom clamps and add it to our frame assembly. So let's come back to our overhead shot and let's start getting things lined up in a way we can pull this off. We're going to try and do it on its side, I think, such that our idler pulleys can stay in there, but it's going to go in this orientation with the idler pulley towards the front of the helicopter, and then it's going to go, it's pretty obvious when you look at where the holes start to line up and where the boom, the rounded parts of the boom sort of fit in these little windows here, so that kind of lines this piece up nicely. And then our idler pulley with this piece sitting in place will fit in here in this little channel. Put my fingers behind it so you can see there's a little channel here, and our idlers will fit in there. And then once that's in place, these two little bolt holes in here will line up, and you can see in there. So I'm going to go ahead and start working on getting this slowly aligned by getting some of these screws here just sort of finger tightened, so that I don't have to hold this quite as much. Again, I'm not going to put any Loctite here. I don't put any Loctite on any of the frame stuff until the whole thing's together and is feeling really square. Looking at the screws that are going to go into our boom clamp in the manual, they're M3x6s, which are these guys right here, I believe, but rather than believing, it's handy to just keep a caliper around and just measure. And these look like they're actually 8s. So I've got some M3x6s. Here they are. Here. So we'll just double check these. Yep. And yep. Okay, so it's important to note that they don't show putting one of these in all of these holes yet. So we're just going in the top holes at this point. So here and here. And then I'm just going to snug it up. Not going to really tighten this at this point. Okay, so we've got our two here. And then it looks like we're going to take 3 2.5x6s. 2 of them will go into the bottom of our idler pulley. So let's go ahead and get that inserted. I'm going to flip things over here. I'm going to take our idler pulleys and just sort of press fit them back in here. It'll be a little fussy. And you know what? I may need to loosen this. Nope. To do it, there we go. There. Just got to push the pin down and then back. A little fussy here. There we go. So now we've got our idler assembly place it's sort of hard. This whole thing is black on black on black, so I'm trying to move it around to help you guys out. But you can see we've got that. So I'm going to hold this in place with one finger here, and then take our 2.5 by 6s, and we're going to get 2 in right down here. Tighten that a little bit so I don't have to quite worry about this falling apart in my hands again. And just snugging these up, not going crazy. I'll wait till I Loctite this and I feel like things are square and the main shaft is feeling good. And then our third 2.5 by 6 looks like it's going to go is this hole right here. So we're going to go ahead and put in that one. Okay, so we've gone ahead and gotten our 2 screws into the boom clamps. We've got our 3 screws into our idler pulley setup, and that looks good to go. So with that, we are moving on to the next step. And the next step looks like where things start to get interesting, where we get to add the other side of the frame. So we're basically going to copy what we've done on this side of the frame in terms of screws on the other side. Now, when you go and look at the manual again, there are a lot of exploded lines and drawings. Reference the color chart in here, and then just very carefully make sure that you get these screws in everything here. So I'm going to go ahead and take care of getting all those installed now. We'll kind of time-lapse rush our way through that step, and then we'll come back and talk about if there were any challenges there. Okay, so coming back to the model, let's take our frame side and get it loosely in place here. Use our alignment pin as a guide here. And got our sort of boom clamp pieces here helping us out a bit. And then we're just going to start slowly and loosely putting things together. I'm going to start by picking up the idler pulley. So that'll start holding things together from the center, and then work my way around. You have to just sort of get further into a build before it makes sense in your brain. So now that I see this and I see the bottom rail and we have more parts installed, it's not just half a frame, it becomes obvious that this little top servo frame is going to now go here into the top of the bearing block. So I missed that on the other side, so we'll go ahead and do the other side once we get this one in. To do that thing where we make sure we did everything. We got the 3 screws around the idler pulleys, the 2 at the top of the tail boom clamp. We did our canopy pin piece there. We've got our 4 bolts around our bearing block, and we've got the 3 at the bottom. And with that, we have ourselves an upper frame assembly. Now, the next thing that I like to do at this point, before I start Loctiting things together, is I'm going to go ahead and open the main shaft. Okay, the next thing I like to do at this point, so right now we've got our upper frame assembly here, and nothing is Loctited in here with the exception of the canopy pins. That's the only place I put Loctite at this point. Why did I do that? It's because I like to make sure my frames are very square. Now obviously this table is flat and level, and even though it's on a rubber mat here, I know things are good, but I check for square with the main shaft, because what I want to happen is I want to be able to drop the main shaft in starting with this chamfered edge, and I want it to go through all 3 bearing blocks, and I want it to almost fall right through the frame. I haven't put any oil on here right now, so obviously the first 2 bearings are nice and smooth here, right? Because they are captured and they are in alignment. I'm just going to get that collar in there. So what I want to make sure is that I can move this main shaft through smoothly. So this is a little bit tighter than I'd like, so what I'm going to do is loosen all 3 of these bolts a little more, and then get it aligned. And I'll keep doing this and loosening and tightening bolts around the bearing blocks until I'm happy with how it goes. I want this to really, almost here, see, this is what I want. Ready? I want to let go of this and I want it to fall through the frame. That's what I want. I want this. Once I get it in, I want it to, well, didn't fall that time. Fell a second ago. But you want it to nearly fall all the way through, and if I add a little tri-flow to this, it'll go a little better, but I want this to be in perfect alignment. So I basically keep playing with this until I make sure that this can move freely, and it's very little resistance. Like this is great, right? Very little resistance, moves back and forth, even with that collar in there, and I can keep kind of shifting things around, loosening and tightening bolts until I get it, and then I slowly will tighten one bolt on each side until things are good. And I can also loosen the 4 bolts around our bearing block here with the main shaft in place. The same thing on the other side. They were just sort of snugged up, but we're going to loosen them even more to give it free movement. And then, see, it's getting even easier now. So that, what I want to happen is, again, this. Let's see if this works and cooperates for the camera. There we go. That's what I want. I want it to fall through the frame because that's perfect alignment, right? Like that. So that's what I want to do. So I'm going to slowly work back and forth and start tightening bolts now, and then keep checking it, and then we'll come back once we've got it all tightened up and it's good. And then from there, what we'll do is we will pull one bolt at a time, put Loctite on it, and replace it, and go all the way around the helicopter from one side to the other, one bolt at a time, until the whole thing's been Loctited. And doing that ensures that this alignment we've gotten going is going to work out. So I've just sort of snugged up one side a little bit. Let's check it again, see if it's still happy and falling through the frame. Oh, see, something we did there added a little bit of friction. So I'm going to go ahead and loosen these back up and just keep at this. So I'll go ahead and do that, and we'll come back when it's good. Okay. All of the bolts are tightened, not Loctited. Let's check it. Beautiful. Check it again. Boom. Love it. Now I'm going to go ahead and work my way around one bolt at a time and get this whole thing Loctited. So I'll be back in a long time. Here we go to time-lapse mode. Okay, so we're at the end of build day 1, and our main shaft is moving back and forth wonderfully. And just keeping an eye on the green Loctite on this bearing here. But anyway, so our main shaft is flowing through the frame nicely. I've gone ahead and Loctited all of these bolts all the way around, one at a time, loosening and then tightening them, getting Loctite in there. So we're going to call it a day. It's close to about midnight here on the East Coast, so that's long enough for me. So with that, thanks for watching this episode of the Specter V2 build series. Coming up next, we'll continue on the frame, get our servos installed, and go from there. So once again, thanks for watching. Appreciate you.
Helidirect!